The Doom Train. A 25i NBOME and Salvia Divinorum trip report, posted by M to Erowid.org, March 8th, 2018. I was well into a pretty heavy 25i NBOME trip when I decided to take a teensy tiny little hit of 25x Salvia that was bestowed upon me through some fortune. Exhaling, I laid back and felt all the oncomings of this. I immediately noticed the intense, sharp, geometric and orderly visuals of the NBOME begin to morph and round off at the edges, becoming more animated, organic and fluid, and went much further in depth. There was a real life and meaning to it now, aside from pretty colours and shapes, that is. Along with this, I felt the presence of someone, or more than one maybe, some unseen hand unfolding and revealing various pages of this reality for me. It was like a circus joke, a figuresque thing, in the corners of my perception, manipulating the world in front of me, turning the pages. I started feeling I was in a great festival of life in all the universe. From out of the corners of my perception, I felt the warm company of others dancing and morphing and frolicking around me. There was a very feminine presence to it all, the soul of womanly things, surrounding me, welcoming me to this world. I giggled and felt joyous. I sat in this experience, not feeling too out of place, as otherworldly as it all seemed. Slowly, the salvia wore off, and I was back into my N-bomb world. Now, the N-bomb world didn't seem so intense or deep as I had thought, compared to this little taste of salvia world. I just had my first trip within a trip. Then, I decided to take a normal hit and hold it in for a good time. Now, I don't know what I was expecting, but this was beyond anything I've ever thought possible as a state of being. Being conscious and witnessing what I did will forever have a lasting impact on my life. So here's my interpretation, putting this to words to the best of my ability, which oddly won't be that difficult compared to trying to describe, say, LSD or mushroom trips. Exhale. Now, I'm expecting something similar to what I just felt earlier, but with a little more zing, so to speak. God, I was wrong. So very wrong. Time freezes, and I realise something very big is about to happen. Very big. Oh no, I thought to myself. Too much? I knew it. This was it. Titanic was about to hit the iceberg. My perception of sound went to a flat silence, and all I heard or sensed was this massive machine approaching from far away. And by massive, I mean Unicron planet devouring massive. Just being aware of it was so weird. It was so big, and it felt like it sucked all the air out of the room, like a vacuum created on a beach before a tsunami. There was a low rumbling, and it rumbled with the force of a great machine that I could feel shaking me. The shaking felt physically real. It approached from the distance, making whirring and whizzing noises here and there. It was just so big. I could feel this machine was sweeping a route, like an ice resurfacer or a lawnmower. It got extremely close, and then whirred off along its path into the great distance, then coming back in a swelling ferocity. To and fro it went. Luckily, I was a little prepped for this from reading some great stories of salvia experiences, and I realised I was about to be shredded up once the machine made its pass over me. But still, reading about it simply cannot prepare you. I waited, somewhat afraid now, only frightened at how truly serious and big this felt. What is it going to do to me? This machine was mowing the lawn around my mind, and it would soon mow over my very mind itself. Everything in front of me, in my physical space, began to push towards me, clutter up like an invisible hand was mashing my room into me. I stared at one spot on my wall, by a speaker and a can of beer sitting on top of it, and just waited for it. I felt this machine shredding right past me. I was afraid to look anywhere else and just wait for it to hit me. Then, my turn came. It unzipped the seams of my reality. I saw the cracks open up in the walls and little faces peering back from behind the scenes. The can of beer and speaker became an intersect of where this machine had sliced through, and reality peeled back from floor to ceiling. It was like a knife tearing open a curtain. There were cuts and slashes all over my walls, and it was so vivid. It was just like seeing a knife tearing through a curtain, but with even more fluidity than with cloth. The beer can had a face now like a cartoon. It was very much alive. All the objects and anything near these torn edges had faces and life to it, like little cartoon characters. I literally saw the very fabric of reality rip open, and the borders around and in it come to life. When I looked into the other side, it was almost like, oops, you weren't supposed to see that, no data written here yet. I wasn't sure, but looking into or out of my room, I saw these puppeteers holding my room together. These chameleon-like camouflage ninja people. They posed and stretched out on all sides of the walls and corners, holding it together in disguise, like they were supporting a front or a hoax. When I noticed them, they shapeshifted and acrobated themselves elsewhere, and the room itself disappeared. This was a very brief and bizarre moment. I had no sense of inside or outside at all. Was I looking in at this, or was I looking out? It seemed like I was seeing the universe's safeguard of experiencing technical difficulties. We'll be back with you shortly, while the rest of the program loaded itself up. Looking back at this specific part though, I think I was just experiencing a space beyond my 3 dimensions and couldn't quite come to terms with what it was, and I was just witnessing the architects of these constructs move about, like I was backstage watching the acts play out. The shredding continued, or so I thought, but it was just gone suddenly. I was expecting it to get stronger and more intense, but it levelled off and faded out peacefully. And going back a sec, it's important to note that during this shredding phenomena, I could feel a very unique but distinct burning sensation on all the edges this machine was cutting, like open wounds. It felt like a fire to me, but not painful, just this fiery feeling in evenly cut folds. Then I realised that was it. I'm in Salvia world now, all the way in. It really wasn't that bad after all. It was just that serious impending onset of something huge about to happen that took me aback. But once I was there, I felt okay. I also felt taxed, like I'd reached the top of a mountain after a strenuous climb. I lay at the peak, exhausted and overwhelmed. I can't really describe much of the rest. I saw the fantastic inner workings of the nature of reality, all the little souls and people that work all the magic like a circus act. These creatures were very clown-like, nimble, cartwheeling and flipping and flowing here and there. I just couldn't keep up. They seemed shadowy and elusive. I got a glimpse of all this, and then the high receded. The entire time I just kept saying, "Oh my god, wow," to myself over and over. I have no idea. I didn't know it could be so big. At this point, I was just in too much awe to try to make sense of anything. I was just happy to know that I managed to get through it. I called this strong force a machine, mainly because of the sounds and vibrations I was getting from it. It was like a hedge clipper or buzzsaw. It had some very calculated and mechanised notions to it, but at the same time, it was just simply a huge surging force of energy. It was a very defining threshold between realities. One would have to actually experience it to understand how truly massive it actually feels. It also seemed finite though in a sense. I could sense its largeness, which meant it had a size, right? Well, maybe for another time. I know a lot of higher level trips describe being shot out or blasted out into space, whatever decorative words you want to choose. But for me personally, it felt like it all came to me. I didn't actually go anywhere. I was here the whole time. But the rest of it blasted into me, or the space that I know as reality. This was one of the most amazing experiences in my life so far. Filled with God, visited by spirits. A Salvia Divinorum tripper bought by Zissou, uploaded to Iruid, August 6, 2011. Prior to a visit to Mexico, I bought some Salvia divinorum because I wanted to understand the religious mindset before visiting the Aztec and Mayan ruins. I've been fascinated by these cultures since taking LSD at the age of 17 and seeing Aztec lizard men, crocodiles maybe, appearing in my hallucinations. The Salvia was marked 40X, a claim I was dubious about given the likely lack of regulation of legal highs. It was bought from a head shop for £20, I haggled from £25, for an amount that I now know is enough for 4 experiences. I'd also bought, but not taken, some San Pedro, because peyote was not available. This is relevant later. My experience with hallucinogens at this time had involved 1 LSD trip, 3 mushroom trips of Mexican and Thai, 1 week morning glory trip, and a lot of skunk and hash in my youth. I've also taken cocaine about 20 times, about 20 ecstasy pills, amphetamine a few times, as well as ephedrine. I'm 28, male, weighing 12 stone. I'm not on any prescriptions. That night I had shared a bottle of wine and 4 bottles of beer at a gig. I'd sobered up by the time I was ready to smoke the salvia. I was in a good mood, but a little anxious about what would happen because of the horror stories I had read online. I put on some fairy lights in my bedroom, laid a tie-dye over the bed to make the room more visually interesting, and put Deep Forest on the hi-fi, the only spiritual sounding CD I had with tribal singing in it. Because I was alone, a sitter is advised by the packaging, I tied myself to the bed to ensure that I didn't go walkabout and hurt myself. I tied my left leg to the bottom left corner of the bed and my right arm to the top right. It sounds silly, but I was glad I had done so later, and this strange preparation only added to the ritual feel of the experience. I leaned over to the side of the bed with my free arm to smoke the salvia through a water bong, placed almost out of reach on the wooden floor so I wouldn't knock it over later. Peak experience. I filled the bong and finished its contents in 2 long drags, holding the smoke in each time as I used to with weed. I felt the effects almost immediately and lay down in a mild euphoria with mild visual distortion, most similar to the mildest effects of LSD. I was after a full-blown shamanic experience, so once I had gathered my thoughts, I filled the bong a second time and smoked a second helping in 1 long draw. This time, the effect was hardcore. I got tunnel vision focused on the bong, then sank backwards, and reality fractured with dark linear folds. The music became beautiful and enhanced the experience. The salvia spirits, so I believed at the time, began pulling me with fuzzy green arms covered in eyes to take me into their dimension. Their vague form was a green loop, functioning as both head and arms, with a translucent body in between. They were playful, unthreatening, yet determined, tugging with the music. The whole of my right hand side, the side they were tugging at, tingled pleasantly, whereas to my left hand side everything looked and felt normal, as if only half of me was in their dimension. I wanted the feeling all over my body, so I asked for it and offered my cheek, but that didn't work. The row of spirits pulling me were themselves pulled by another row of spirits, and so on so forth in a relief type hallucination. The forms had materialised out of the background. My tethered leg and arm formed the line between reality and spirit world, and prevented them from taking me, even though I wanted them to. "Speak to me, spirits," I said, and laughed. I was filled with the Spirit of God, and an overwhelming shining ecstasy that was sexual as well as divine. I've never felt anything like it. It was the most extraordinary experience of my life. A fuzzy green spirit rose from my peripheral vision, and I greeted it as the spirit of San Pedro. Perhaps he was someone else, unless San Pedro's spirit is friends with the Salvia spirits, and wanted to say hello before my next planned trip. The spirit studied me curiously as if it was making its mind up about me, and was then accepting and friendly. The visuals were not as concrete as LSD, but made sense to me because I perceived these spirits as not fully materialised in my dimension. I closed my eyes and saw dark 3D scenes made from snaking tubes shooting past each other, similar to those in a mescaline video I'd recently watched, which indicates that the user's memory rather than only the drug could play a part in what is seen, perhaps even that the user can control what is seen. The most powerful part of the hallucination was my belief that the spirits were real. I've no idea how long the peak of the experience lasted, but it felt like 10 minutes. Come down. The spirit then left and the salvia spirits faded away, as they were when I had taken my first hit on the bong. I got some socially conditioned guilt for having such a strong experience and wanted to sober up, so I can imagine how some people may freak out, but the desire for reality was not as bad as the moments of confusion I've had in a mushroom or LSD trip. At this point I resolved that it was a good experience not to be repeated. When I felt ready, I untied my hand and dozed for a bit, enjoying the come down. I had pressure marks in various places on my wrist, indicating that I had been moving around in my euphoria, perhaps even trying to get up. Or these marks were from the spirits pulling me, depending on how you look at it. Given some of the nightmare stories on the internet, I was glad that I had tied myself up, and I would recommend that anyone without a sitter does so. Maybe even do so if you have a sitter, because you are not in control of your faculties whatsoever during the peak experience. The bulk of the trip lasted about 50 minutes, estimated based on the length of the CD I had playing. Conclusion. A visionary and euphoric gateway to the spirit world. The belief and emotional aspect of the hallucinations makes other drugs pale in comparison. The visuals were second only to LSD out of all I've experienced so far. I'll probably do it again sometime, but not for a while. I wouldn't call Salvia recreational at all. It's powerful and to be used with caution. Given the low dose, it is hard to gauge how much to take, so it should only be used in a safe environment. Just a piece to the whole. A Salvia trip report by SF Splizzer, uploaded to Erowid December 13th, 2021. The night began in search of a new bong, or possibly a hookah. Duncan and I went to a smoke shop on Mission Street, but we were not satisfied with the selection and moved on to the hate. We stumbled upon a smoke shop and went in to have a look around. After some time of staring with no real intentions of spending the kind of money it takes to get a new piece, Duncan asked if I'd ever tried Salvia. I said no, and he said it was a pretty intense high that only lasted a few minutes. This intrigued me, and we bought some, but I was still under the impression that it was equitable with taking a few whippets. When we first got home, our other two roommates, Ross and Reed, asked if we had bought a new bong. We then asked them if they had ever tried Salvia, and both of them hadn't. Somehow I was nominated to go first. We all sat around the living room and all looked at me as I stared into the long chamber of the bong. With instruction from Duncan, I was to rip the whole bowl and then hold for as long as I can. So I did. And that is when everything changed. It hit me hard with a whirlwind of delusion. I sat back in my chair with no choice of doing otherwise. I quickly forgot that I had just smoked a fair amount of an unknown hallucinogen and had no idea what was happening. As everything melted away around me, I had no idea where I was, what I was, or even that I was. The next part is unclear, as I think I may have taken too much for the optimal peak. The peak for me was so far beyond comprehension and beyond self-awareness that I don't really recall what happened for those moments as I drifted off the physical reality of the universe and into some sort of vastness of ambiguity and insignificance. The next part became more clear and easier to remember, but only as a memory of something that had happened rather than a clear experience that can be easily interpreted. I sat glued to my chair and feeling that I had no body and without identity. My chair began to feel attached to me, as did the table in front of me. As I continued to scan my surroundings, I noticed that my connection extended beyond my chair and the table and onto the couch next to me. The couch was in turn connected to a face, Duncan's face. He was staring at me with a concerned look, and I heard Ross, who was also part of this now three-headed blob of a neutral coloured cloth, say, "Are you alright?" This, in addition to all three of them staring at me with a mutual concerned look, made me feel very scared and paranoid that I was not alright. By then I had long forgot any and all past experience, and threw out the window any notion of self-identity or personality, and began feeling that this was my new reality, that of a piece of a blob of some sort that had some recognisable features like my coffee table of 2 years, and Ross's face. The whole time I felt as if there was tons of weight pushing down on me, like I was hanging upside down. It was very uncomfortable, but would have to accept this as my new fate, because I felt as if the truth was being revealed to me for the first time, and everybody but I knew about it already. It was now time to come to terms with the fact that I was simply a blob type thing with no real identity other than my face, which seemed to distinguish me from the other faces in the blob. Then it really got scary. I heard over my shoulder people talking, but not normal people. They were much larger than the faces within my blob. I must be a lesser part of them, I thought to myself. And the large being, who reminded me of my mother, or at least I felt a maternal connection to it, said, "I think he's finally starting to get it." The whole room, which was already spinning and had sucked me into itself, became blurry and took on a new form. I was now simply a piece of cloth on the undersleeve of a much larger being. Now the room was really turning over itself, and I felt as if I could almost see around the bend to catch a glimpse at the face of the large being, but was constantly interrupted by the nervous and concerned faces of Reed and Ross, who were now talking to me. I tried to respond to what they were saying, but what they were saying seemed so insignificant compared to what was happening. I felt compelled to explain to them what I was witnessing, but the only words I could muster were, "I see you." This only made them more perplexed and concerned. Reed then left the room in a hurry, which didn't seem possible because surely he was glued to his seat the same way I was. During this whole trip, confusion and fear were the constant emotions that I felt. When he returned, I was beginning to get a grip and realise where I was, and that I was not simply a piece to a sleeve of some greater being. Although, perhaps I saw a glimpse into a reality that cannot be found through conscious thought, and it was manifested as an image of interconnectivity and insignificance. The image of the t-shirt was the primary hallucination in my trip, but other visions were constantly swirling around also, from sounds and memories from my childhood, to soaring through outer space with a feeling of being outside of the universe. When Reed returned with water, I felt scared and wanted the feeling to end. I tried standing, but immediately fell to my knees and spilt the water everywhere. My focus then went to the TV. It seemed that everything that was said pertained to me, how I was feeling and what I was seeing. I remember Mike Rowe saying how something is bending and being pushed around a wheel, and I thought he was speaking directly to me about the universe and or the room. It was as if there was some sort of conspiracy that everyone was in on, but me and the TV shows were now telling me what is real. I felt stupid to have not figured it out before, and yet I was still very confused and frightened. And then as suddenly as it began, it was over. I stood up and felt calm and good. We all had a cigarette, and it was over. The entire trip lasted a little more than 5 minutes. Beyond the Void, a Salvia trip report uploaded to Shroomery, 10th of October 2013. Hello everyone, this is my first trip report on the Shroomery. This trip actually happened about a month and a half ago, and I would usually never post a report this long after, but this experience was so powerful I felt that I should share it somewhere, and I haven't forgotten a bit of this one. I never will. First off, I'm of the belief that Salvia truly is a plant of divination, and that it holds incredibly spiritual states on the other side of the rabbit hole. I respect that most people don't see it as such, as it can be very unpleasant. If misused, Sally will sense your ignorance and kick your ass. I smoked Salvia of various strengths, 35 to 40 times by this point, in a lot of different environments, and I will say two things to the people who would like to partake in this substance. A, it will probably be scary, at least the first time. Being thrown from reality to such a state of utter dissociation so quickly one cannot help but be afraid. It's all about letting go. And recently I've read of the way that Salvia is actually smoked in Mexico, which is something I'd like to try and would probably give a better experience. Even if it is scary, the experience can be useful. And B, packing a full bowl of Salvia is not fucking necessary. A full bowl is probably like 15 to 30 doses depending on a few factors. So when you see someone at a party go to rip a whole bowl, and that person acts completely moronic, know that you don't have to be that guy. You don't exactly need to weigh doses, but it's easy enough to eye out a 1/10 of a gram of an extract, approximate dose. So I arrived home on this night after working 6 or so hours. I showered, ate, and smoked a joint. I felt as if everything was right tonight, so I grabbed my baggie of Salvia. Now of all these experiences, I had my very intense experiences over a period of time, maybe 7 or so of my experiences being the mind-blowing out of reality trips. So this would be my first time alone. I sat on my couch with my legs crossed and sort of meditated for a while just to relieve myself of some stress. It was time. I packed the bowl with my dose and turned the TV onto the Wings Live in 79 concert that's always on Palladia in Glasgow, I believe. Little did I know how much this live video would change the trip for me a few short minutes, eternities later. So I took my hit and held it in, laying down. I started to feel it, and then boom, no breakthrough. So I packed another dose. I will note that anyone who isn't experienced with this shouldn't take more doses after the initial, but I had really wanted to trip that night and it felt okay. Long story short, this reloading continued 3 to 4 more times, which I realised after I could have saved a lot of salvia by actually packing it correctly. Use the screen, kids, and hold your smoking the whole time. That was the problem, I believe. I placed the bowl on the floor as I felt it hit me. Wings had just begun a song, so I heard 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it really hit me. I heard those numbers repeated over and over and over and over again. They were embedded within my soul, and I felt the pitch drop lower until McCartney saying these numbers sounded like they were coming through a concentration camp bullhorn. As I lay on my couch, everything began layering very heavily. I was pulled by the force into the corner of my couch while gripping my blanket. So at this point I was at complete ego death. I knew not who I was, or the house in which I was. Now this really scared me, and things started to spiral. The layers swirled around me and made me feel trapped. I couldn't escape no matter how hard I tried. At this point I just completely shut my eyes, and I got these odd spiraling closed-eye visuals that kept repeating themselves. Imagine a kaleidoscope, with weird black and white lines instead of colours. This is where it got insane. I opened my eyes and was totally engulfed in darkness. I was surrounded by silence. Looking down, I realised I was not a body, I was just an entity. All that existed were my eyes and darkness. I was dead. When this thought came through my head, I truly and honestly believed that I was dead. I started out trying to make sense of it all and tried to accept my fate. I felt nothing but a sort of agonising emptiness within myself. When I was a kid especially, I was afraid of death. How sudden, painful, and endlessly depressing it can be. I started to flash back to this, and I saw myself as a child sitting at my table in my head. These visions were within my head, but it seemed too realistic not to be happening, and I started to experience it. I watched myself sitting at the kitchen table eating dinner, and I excused myself. I remember this vividly, tripping or not. When I got into the bathroom, I sat there and cried. I bawled my fucking eyes out at the thought of my life being so meaningless and inconsequential. This used to happen a fair amount to me. I've always been somewhat afraid of death. But this time I couldn't get the thoughts out of my head, and as the darkness persisted, I accepted death. I accepted that I would never come back, that wherever I was the place I belonged, and that there was a reason for me dying. Sometimes acceptance is key. I felt these eternities pass until I truly, truly accepted my death, and it was like a fleeting moment of pure bliss. I came back into reality while things were still layering heavily. Sometimes when you come down from Salvia, before you're totally back, there's a nagging feeling that you're in somewhere that you didn't come from. Little things feel off, and it's like a plastic sort of universe. I had it in my head that both of my parents were dead in this world for some reason. So I ran upstairs and saw them laying in bed, taking a deep breath. Then I ran to my piano, as the layers were still happening some, and I just started playing. I don't remember what it was, but it made me feel so much better. Honestly, it was fucking horrifying. Would it change any bit of it? Absolutely not. It was definitely one of the most beautiful moments in my life. And then the awesome afterglow set in. I walked downstairs and poured a glass of milk, laughing when I realised that all of that happened in 4 minutes. Safe trippings, everyone. I would like to tell you about a very enlightening psychedelic journey I went on with Salvia 80x extract. The first thing I did was clear my head. I then took a small pinch of the extract, too small to measure precisely, but would estimate 1/6 to 1/7 of a gram. I put it in my water pipe, which is in my opinion the only way to smoke salvia. Next, I took 2 slowly drawn 4 to 5 second hits and held them each for 10 to 15 seconds. The thing about salvia, at least for me, is that it hits as the second hit is being exhaled. After the physical effects start, I have about 20 seconds to get situated before the full psychedelic effects come in. I'll take a moment to describe the physical effects. My body felt much like the fizz on a freshly poured glass of Coke on ice, and much like fizz, was slowly dissolving. I consider this the part that must occur before the journey can begin, the dissolving or taking of the physical body by the light beings. I laid back in silent darkness and closed my eyes. Almost immediately, the visuals had started. I saw a caterpillar, though made of hexagonal pieces, except for the head, which was round and possessing cartoon-like facial features, which formed an outward spiral. I realised that this spiral tunnel was my manifest doorway. I began to proceed forward. My first impression was that I would shoot through the spiral like light speed. It was, however, a long journey, at least in my mind. It only took seconds in reality. Once I was through the spiral, I was in a bland, empty room. White walls, wood floor, and a single window, very colonial in style. It then occurred to me that this was the barest and plainest representation of my man-made confines. I could then feel that they wanted me to leave my physical world completely. For though my mind was on a journey, I was still conscious of the fact that I had a body, and some other part of my mind could still feel it. At once, there was a sensation like the rolling of a huge wave. It felt as though they not only wanted to take my body, but the house and everything in it as well. I pleaded with them, not afraid, but just a little unsettled. "You don't have to take the house, you know. I can leave my body on my own." At this point, still in the empty room, I said, "Don't worry, I will go beyond the window. I promise, I will see the river." I know I said this only because I was recording the experience. No sooner had I made the promise that I achieved full astral projection and left my body completely behind. I was transported by the light beings to a large flowing stream, glistening in the sun with oak trees on the banks. I was there for a short time before there was a very smooth transition from the stream to a beautiful sunlit ocean shore where there were trees that I couldn't quite place, but that looked similar to acacias. There was an elf-like being there, standing on the shore. I could see streams like the one before, except smaller and flowing from one and through me and all the things. There came to me, not auditory, but telepathic teachings. The knowledge was not there one moment, then the next it was. I was gaining knowledge exponentially, and being shown that I was nothing in the physical sense, yet in the cosmic soul sense, I was part of everything, and that everything was part of me, and that we are all like this. We just have to reconnect with the realm of enlightenment to realise it, that we are all meant to be one with. After all this was learnt, I was abruptly but gently returned to my body. There are physical effects afterwards that last 3 to 5 minutes. It's a bit difficult to move at first, and any motions I do make are shambolic. Let me start this off by saying that I'm rather well versed in drugs. Throughout my life, I have enjoyed pot, mushrooms, acid, MDMA, MDA, opiates, and many types of prescription medication, and finally, and most recently, DMT. I long ago outgrew the stage of taking substances in order to get messed up. I now take substances to expand my consciousness and experience things beyond my normal life. To elaborate a bit more on my situation in life, I am a standard white-collar worker who does IT for a branch of the federal government. For all intensive purposes, I lead a normal life, including a 9-to-5 job. This interferes with the uses of substances for me, because I must be fully mentally aware during my time at work, leaving only Friday and Saturday for experiences. I've taken Salvia 4 times before this. The first time was 3 years ago, an unknown brand and strength mixed with pot. It was termed buttfuck marijuana by our group. These experiences were generally very mild, with much more pot than salvia and little to no effects from it. More recently, I've had 3 other trips, one inside the same location as this trip, but during the day, that was rather mild but very interesting. One experience out in the forest where I felt very much at one with nature, and one more where I smoked some salvia given to me by a friend, brand and strength unknown, and felt very stoned, similar to pot, and was very physically impaired, stumbling, walking into doors, etc. To note, my experiences with mushrooms and acid have been interesting, but they've always seemed to be additions to reality. I was still part of the normal world, it just had additions made to it. This Salvia experience was not like that. For a while, I was totally disconnected from the real world, with the exception of music. I did not understand what people had meant when they said it was not a hallucinogen, that it took you to another place, but after this experience, I do. Now, onto the trip. Time, approximately 11 PM. Location, bedroom, lying in a queen-size bed. The other members of my family are asleep in other portions of the house. I turn on the TV and put on a playlist, mostly of the Beatles, and starting with the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds off of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, at a low volume. The TV is at the far end of the room, and at 60 inches, it fills the majority of my view. I put on a pleasing visualization to go with the music, and turn off the lights. I pause the music and plan to start it when I'm finished smoking the Salvia. I'm sitting cross-legged in my bed. I smoke one large hit of the Salvia through a bubbler. I hold for approximately 20 seconds and then release. I attempt to take another hit, but as soon as I breathe in the first wisp of smoke, I realise that it is unnecessary. I set the bubbler down and fall back hard into my pillows, reaching for and fumbling with the remote to start the music because I cannot seem to remember how it works. By luck, I hit the play button and the music begins. As I lay back into the pillows, I feel the Salvia gravity that many people seem to experience when taking the substance. I do not remember if I closed my eyes, but I feel myself sinking into the bed with my eyes losing focus. And when they regain it, it appears as if I'm on a yellow surface. It looks as though sunflower petals are growing everywhere. Not the whole flower, just the yellow petal. The sky is a vibrant light blue without clouds, and as I look forward, I see a shadow pass over my head. It continues until I am picked up on what appears to be a giant rolling sunflower, although it is somewhat abstract in its appearance. As I am picked up by this flower, I see the yellow surface pulled up with it in a line as the flower rolls, exposing a brown surface that looks somewhat like an abstract form of dirt beneath it. As the giant flower rolled, I went with it. Very slowly, but feeling in my body the force that one feels during takeoff and landing of an aeroplane. As the flower continued to rotate, I remember seeing some form of similar flowers off across an endless land of yellow, rolling slowly just as my flower was. As my flower neared its full rotation, I was headed back towards the ground and had a moment of consciousness of a sort. I wondered what would happen if someone were to come in right now. Normally I can snap myself out of most drug experiences if I need to, but I felt that with Salvia I would not be able to at all. It is odd, I am normally a very paranoid and cautious person, but this was not a scared feeling, just a thought. It was as if someone had told me that their flowers were beginning to sprout for the spring. As the flower continued, it appeared that a person was reaching out to me from the ground in the Salvia world. As the flower rolled over them, they too were pulled up into it. The figure appeared to be a brown-skinned male and friendly. The flower continued to rotate for what seemed like half an hour of real-world time. As the flower completed its second rotation and I passed by the ground and continued upwards on the rotation, I felt my body rising back to the surface as one does in a swimming pool. Not a rush per se, but a gentle motion that pulled me back into reality. As I got closer to the 3 o'clock position, moving counterclockwise, I could see the darkness of my room above me, as if I was being lifted out of a hole in the ground. Once I was back into my bed, I sat up slowly and said, "Wow, that was really weird," and lay back down. At this point the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was coming to an end, meaning my experience had only been around 3 minutes of real world time. I lay in my bed for another few minutes before sitting up and becoming entranced with the Windows Media Player visualizations playing through my Xbox 360 on my TV with the music. I watched these visualizations for a short while before becoming bored of it. As I flipped through them, I found one that I liked and watched it for a while, eventually figuring out I can control the visualization with the Xbox 360 controller, controlling speed and direction as well as twisting. I was entranced with varying visualizations for another 20 or 30 minutes before I began to get tired. I turned off the TV and turned over to go to sleep. I slept very soundly with no dreams. The next day I felt perfectly normal with no noticeable after effects from the Salvia. The day after, however, I was sitting on a desk in an office at work. As 2 of my co-workers were talking, I began to zone out completely for a minute or two, staring off blankly towards where the corner of the room met the carpet. I've had a few moments in the 3 days since then where I felt very different and slightly clouded in my mind. All in all, I would consider my experience very positive though. I would like to experiment with Salvia more, and I'm growing my own plant to connect more of the substance. The experience was amazing, and I would like to duplicate it, but I know that trying too hard will only lessen the experience, and the reason I enjoyed this so much was because I just let the Salvia take hold of me completely. When the time feels right again, I'll take more of the Salvia, and see what else the plant wants to show me. I'll start off with a little bit of information. First, I've been awake for about 24 hours and it's about 8 AM, so my grammar may be terrible at the moment. Second, I've never tried any psychoactive drug before, so this is going to be a completely new experience for me. I like to consider myself a logical and open-minded person. I also strive to expand my mind as much as possible, so this might help explain the reasoning behind my trip. I've heard about Salvia for several years now, but I never got around to trying it, mainly due to skepticism. Finally, at the beginning of August, I had a chance to try it. A couple of people I know who are familiar with it decided to get some for me as a going away gift before I went back to school for the year. It was about 9:20 AM as we drove to my friend's house. I have a tendency to get anxious, so I decided it would be best to let a 0.5mg clonazepam melt under my tongue, just to take the edge off a bit. It was about 9:45 when we had packed up the first bowl of 80x purple sticky salvia. Both of my friends were trying to pressure me into taking the first hit, but being as I am, I like to see the effects on others before I try something. My first friend took a drag and passed it to me. Needless to say, I ended up hitting it before I even saw the effects on her. My third friend then took a hit as I held in the smoke. After that, I took the fourth drag, which cashed the bowl. Within a few seconds, I felt a little wavy and spacey from those two hits. I think it was because I didn't hold the smoke in long enough and didn't have the first hit. After that, my friend who had taken the hit after me packed up the rest of the salvia and handed me the bowl. I took the biggest hit I could and held it in for as long as I could. I passed the bowl to her to let her finish it off and waited. I let out the smoke after probably about 30 to 45 seconds of holding it in and waited. It didn't take long for it to kick in, and when it did, it came like a huge wave. At first, I felt I was being pulled into the chair I was in, and I couldn't quit laughing. I remember trying to talk, but it was so hard to. My voice sounded like I was talking very choppily, and due to this, I became quiet. Immediately after, the visual hallucinations began. The only way I could describe the first one was by this. Imagine graph paper behind you. All the squares are protruding all around me to about arm's length in front of me. They were also orange and yellow. The ones that were behind me were attached to my body. I felt that if I could get to the edge of where the squares stopped, I could get back to reality. I remember thinking the whole time that this couldn't be real, so I struggled for a while to get to the edge, but I would be pulled back into the chair. Eventually, I decided to quit struggling and to calm myself down. I think this happened because as the high set in, I was trying to think logically and clear-headed. After calming myself down, I recalled the squares going away and being able to see the room again. However, in front of me was what looked like to be an opening. The only way I could describe it was being a one-dimensional object that was just large enough for me to fit into. The edges of it were foggy, almost like a portal had been opened up in our known world. Within this portal was a corner of an old room. This library was nothing but bookshelves. They stretched from the floor up. I couldn't see how high they went due to the edge of the portal blocking my view, but every bookshelf was crammed full of old leather-bound books. There were countless ones I could see. Now, even though I couldn't see what these books were about, I understood what this room was. I knew it held all the knowledge of humanity within it. It had writings from the earliest humans to the great philosophers like Plato and Socrates, on up to the knowledge we currently do not know yet. So immediately upon realising what a beautiful place this is, I attempted to go through the portal. I recall being extremely excited and anxious to get my hands on the books. Meanwhile, my two friends were talking up a storm. As they spoke, I could see their voices, which was like grey smoke coming out of them. As I advanced forward, their voices would pull me back into the chair. I tried to fight it as much as possible, but was unable to overpower their voices. I remember getting very, very irritated by this. I wanted to tell them to shut up, but I wasn't able to speak. Eventually, the portal faded away, along with their voices. After that happened, and me relaxing again, everything in the universe suddenly made sense. This part is hard for me to put into words, because it was more of a feeling. I just had a good feeling in me, almost like an ex-high kind of good feeling. Everything I looked at gave off a good vibe and was beautiful. At the time, I couldn't even put the situation going on into words. I just knew that everything was making sense to me. Eventually, that feeling faded away due to me staring at the grandfather clock against the wall. As I stared at it, I noticed the hands being in different positions. One moment it was at the current time, another at 8 AM, and another around 11 PM. Yes, PM. I felt like I was truly time travelling. Once I was done feeling like I was time travelling, I looked to my right to see what my two friends were doing. Apparently their highs had faded away and they were playing with the dogs. I remember sitting there looking at one of the two dogs as he gazed back at me. However, it was a very sad look. I could tell this dog was sad. I was able to completely understand him. The closest thing I can relate it to is extrasensory perception, except we weren't talking to one another in any way, physically or mentally. As I stared at the dog, I felt extreme sadness and sympathy come over me. I felt so bad for him, and I knew he was upset due to how they were treating him. They were trying to play with him, but he obviously didn't like it. It was about this time that my trip started going away. I was still hallucinating a bit. The room kept looking like it was being pulled away from me, or I was being pulled away from the rest of it. I sat there observing this while in extremely deep thought. At times, I would close my eyes and my imagination was extremely vivid. I felt like I was watching a movie on the inside of my eyelids, and it was of whatever I wanted it to be. I continued to think for a while, running what I just experienced through my head. The whole time, I hardly said a word. I believed it was about 10:20, if not a bit later at this time. I actually had to look at my phone because, come to find out, the grandfather clock that I thought was working was actually broken. We left within the next 15 minutes to head to lunch. By this time, all the hallucinations had ended. I just felt high, unbalanced and confused. This faded off for the next hour or so. Around 1 to 1:30 PM, these feelings had completely faded away. The rest of the day I felt extremely calm and relaxed, to the point where I ended up taking a 4 to 5 hour nap around 4 PM. After reflecting about after my trip, I realised what the meaning of the Room of Knowledge was. I strive to expand my mind and learn as much as possible. However, I've constantly had people interfering with this in many different ways, whether it's due to being a distraction, i.e. ex-girlfriend, to just not caring when I try talking to them about different subjects. It made me realise that I had to set my priorities straight, and to continue my quest for more knowledge without allowing people to prevent me from doing so. I wouldn't say I'm dependent on people, but I realise how influential they have been on me lately. After reading a good amount of horror stories about first times for people, I think I'm really lucky I had what I would call an intellectual trip off of ATX. I would like to try thinking about a certain matter over and over again while smoking the Salvia, up until the point of tripping. I'm curious if it is possible to set the stage for one's trip. A Salvia 100X trip report, posted to Shroomery 15 years and 1 month ago, by the user High C. As promised, I now bring you a very odd story of my experiences on Salvia 100X extract. Very interesting stuff. To start off, if you are a noob to Salvia or inexperienced user, please do not start with anything over 20x max to start. The effects hit you so fast, you may not know what to make of it. I purchased 1 gram of 100x Salvia from an online vendor, from which, in my knowledge, is the only one that actually carries it this potent. I purchased 1 gram of 100x Salvia from an online vendor, who in my knowledge, is the only one that actually carries it this potent. It cost $80 shipping included, and arrived in about 4 days. I did not actually believe how authentic it was, until I got a good look at the almost completely white, very aromatic material. Trip number 1. Setting. I was positioned on a very comfortable sofa in my friend T's music studio. My feet were propped up on a fold-out chair, and there was only Christmas lights dimly lighting the near-black environment. I filled my little blue 10-inch bong with ice-cold water, and being a person always trying to push myself, I packed a decent-sized bowl and took a mean hit. I gave the bong to my girlfriend, positioned in front of me, and I looked around the room at my girlfriend T and J, all sitting about 6 feet in front of me. My lungs only allowed me to hold it in for about 40 seconds, a mere 20 from my goal. But believe me, that's all I needed. When it did hit me, the only thought in my mind was I'd just transferred into a cartoon. I tried to close my eyes, but I only still saw the room. I put both hands over my eyes, convinced that somehow my eyes could still see my friend sitting there. I found this so humorous that I almost passed out from laughing so hard. You know them laughs so hard, no noise or anything comes out? I was stuck laughing like that for about a minute, until I calmed down and realised that elephants were violently throwing barrels at everyone in the room. They kept missing me by inches, but I knew it was the drug. Then, I looked at the floor, and it's hard to explain, but the floor kept repeating itself over and over, like 1,000 times, stacking up everywhere around the room. The room then was a beach, and what I thought was a remote part of Atlantis, drained and restored to its original time. By this time, it faded slowly away, and I became more aware of my surroundings. The last part before I was fully okay again was I looked at everyone and said, "I'm ticklish because my legs just had an orgasm." Pretty good, very strong effects. The visuals are also amazing, and my body felt like applesauce being slowly poured out. Crazy, to be honest. However, I sold most of my gram to people. I sold little pinches for $20. Not pinch like a good 2 strong or 3 light trips worth. Anywho, after returning home that night, I had just a little bit left and decided, what the hell, I'll smoke the rest. Mistake number 1, no sitter. Mistake number 2, I was kinda scared to do it by myself. Mistake number 3, I smoked it. Trip number 2. I took all the smoke in one hit in my car in my driveway. I placed the bong and lighter in my passenger seat safely. However, by the time I blew smoke out, I had this undescribable feeling of fear that I was not supposed to be where I was right now. I said, I have to go, but I didn't know why. I then looked at my stereo, and it was in 3 pieces, which disconnected and started floating in opposite directions. Then I looked at my steering wheel where my hands were on. These 3 pieces also broke apart and floated away. And then, my body broke up and floated into 3 different time frames. One was New York City in the early 40s, one was Baltimore City present, and a world of pure imagination, filled with natural growing drugs, shroom and weed for days. But what was really weird was that I was in all 3 of these places at the same time. When I came to, I realised that I'd kinda dozed off, but upon opening my eyes, I saw hundreds of rhinos beelining it straight for my car. I turned it on quickly and started speeding backwards down my driveway. Upon reversing, the bong fell off the passenger seat and I came to again and remembered I had just smoked salvia. By this time, I was pretty okay. I spent the remainder of the time looking at animals and people in the trees, but still with that little spot in the back of my brain that was holding fear of an unseen force. Yeah, this was some crazy shit. I probably won't ever do salvia that potent again, but I will continue to use the plant as long as it remains legal, which I heard may not be long. Peace. A Salvia 100x death trip, posted to Shroomery by Pweds, 8 years and 2 months ago. I'm not new to hallucinogens, but I'm not a constant tripper either. I've experimented with the majority of what's out there, but had never done salvia. My homie had bought some 100x through the mail, along with some non-psilocybe mushrooms, and roped me into trying it out. I honestly didn't think that much of it, so we set it all in motion one night before we were going to hit the town. Mistaken were we ever. I went first. We had a little pipe and used the shrooms as a filter, laying out a good bit of Salvia 100x on top. We went into the bathroom to smoke it because we had a kitchen torch and didn't want the neighbours across the street to see us in the apartment and think we were smoking crack. I sat on the toilet, lid down, lol. Took a deep breath and went for the gold. I took a huge hit, and then another half one before exhaling. I remember telling my homie to hit it, and he looked at me like I was nuts. Then, I started to feel it a little, and that's all I remember from that side of reality. What seemed like an eternity later, my conscious mind found itself being completely shredded. I felt like I was in a salad spinner, except I didn't know who I was or what reality was mine. I was only a consciousness, but stripped of any and all bearings. I was in some total alternate space far from any light or warmth. I very slowly began to regain consciousness, and I vaguely remember being in front of some sort of otherworldly tribunal that was judging me for my serious fuck-up, and the lowly piece of shit I am. Except, I still didn't know who I was. I was on my back now, and rather than being in a salad spinner, reality was peeling off of me in layers from my upper right side to my left feet. Layer after layer, not permitting me to know what was happening at all. Still, I had that often referenced deja vu feeling of being back in a world that I somehow knew but rarely visit. Still not knowing entirely who I was, but remembering what a human is and knowing that I am married. I tried to picture my wife's face, but I just couldn't. I felt as if I was in this terrible limbo for months and was expecting to wake up in a hospital bed. Whatever was happening right now, I had a profound sense that it was incredibly bad and that I had seriously fucked up. I became conscious that my friend was there and that he was asking me questions. He, being kinda dumb, asked me what my son's name was, my son not yet being born at the time. I tried to think and I said, Ozzy, the name of my little dog. Not the best question he could have asked. I began feeling and seeing faces all around me and hearing the sounds of the city. I came back to myself and fuzzily remembered who and where I was. As I began to come out of such chaos, the first thing I asked him was whether he called the police and whether they were on the way. Somehow he had gotten me onto his bed after I had completely blacked out for around 10 minutes and tore his bathroom and front hallway all to hell. After I had taken the hit, he told me that I stood up and started to fall backward towards the tub. He caught me and kept me from hitting my head, but once I was on the ground, I started kicking him and pinned him against the sink, damaging all of his cabinetry. He'd somehow managed to drag me out into the hallway, where I latched onto the underside of the closet door in his front hall, ripping it off the hinges and still kicking at him and repeatedly screaming a terrified, "Who are you?" I can't imagine what the neighbours must have thought right now. Needless to say, we didn't make it out that night, and my homie decided to hold off. After recovering and pondering what I'd done, while not something that I would be quick to do again, I have to say that I'm sort of happy to have had the experience of obliterating my consciousness at that point. Quite frankly, I didn't know it was possible to shatter my reality on such a level. I finally learned that our consciousness is an imprint on our physical selves, and that it must be treated with care and respect. Alternate life for 30 years. A post by Roaming Armed on the Indian Ent subreddit, posted a year ago. So I came across Steve Cantwell's experience with Salvia. He was talking about it on a podcast where he lived an alternate life for 8 years while in the midst of a Salvia trip that lasted about 45 seconds. He lived this alternate life in Texas while he himself was actually in Alaska. In my hunt for such an experience, I came across a gentleman on Reddit who shared his Salvia trip at 19, where he lived an alternate life for 30 years instead. He was kind enough to share the complete trip report, which I've shared below. This isn't one I've made an actual trip report on, but I have mentioned it in some comments recently. People asking about parallel lives. This is an older experience now that I had many years ago. It's always been a pretty personal thing to me, but it's definitely a parallel life experience. I was 19 when it happened. I'd gotten into this habit of tripping with mirrors at the time. So I was in my bathroom, standing in front of the sink. I had some really bad experiences prior, and honestly, my plan was to try and bolt if shit got too strange. I remember with this one in particular, it seemed like nothing was happening. Everything was normal. I leaned in closer to the mirror, and the pupil in one of my eyes started growing and didn't stop. This all happened very fast, and there was no escaping it. It pulled me in like a black hole. I remember being stretched into a line and then smashed into a dot, and then blinked out into darkness. That's all I really have going into it. That blink into darkness faded back out as an opening of my eyes. But when I did so, I was a different person, living a different life on a whole different world than ours. I was now this dude in his 30s, waking up from some kind of overdose. It was very intense on that end of it, because I'd still had strong memories of this life that you and I are in now. It took me about a year of their time to reorient myself to that reality. I couldn't even talk right for a little while because I was trying to talk like we do. Everybody thought I had brain damage. In that year, I went to sleep every night expecting to wake up back here in my bathroom. I could not accept that it was real, but it just wasn't going away at all. I could count time down to the second in that reality. The memories of this life eventually began to fade through. I didn't have all the little details anymore to try and make sense of it to others. Within that life, I also had some pretty big responsibilities that I had to focus on. I had a family and a house. The whole overdose thing cost me a job, but we were able to turn things around once I put my past behind me. You have to understand that this was all backwards for me. While I was there, my experience was that I had done a drug and experienced years of another life, and within that life I did a drug that brought me back. Basically, exactly what I am doing right now in trying to explain this is what I was doing over there too. When you're in one of these parallels like this, no matter which direction you are heading, they become your base reality for the experience. I was questioning our world, our physical reality that exists right now, not theirs. Theirs was my actual reality for the time being. So about 30 years later, I was an old man in their reality. My kids were grown up and had moved out. One of them had asked me to look for something for them in the attic. I went up there and found a box that was very out of place. In it were things from this life that we are in now. This was the single biggest mindfuck I think I've ever experienced in my life. In that box though was a pipe and the same drug I had overdosed on. The same exact bowl actually. It was a little burnt, but still, it had a few tokes left. I was just so confused and felt like I was finally close to an answer. So I hit it one more time and closed my eyes. When I opened them again, I was standing in my bathroom, 19, looking straight at the mirror. And just like the first transition, I was all fucked up about it. I still had to reorient myself, but this was Salvia, so there was no waking up from an overdose. It was like 30 years of whatever the hell that was just crammed into my head all of a sudden. I think it was about 4 minutes that had passed in total. Around 3 AM, I remember just sitting on the bathroom floor feeling like my head was going to explode. But not in the pounding headache kind of way. I just sat there for 4 hours, and at one point I just started crying because I couldn't grasp what had happened to me. I was still very aware of my wife and kids, and wondering if I'd ever see them again. My sister didn't even knock. She just slowly opened the door and asked what was up. She was actually very crucial in helping me reorient myself to this reality as my own name. I tried to explain to her what had happened. My language is a little off again, but not as bad as it was before, and she pretty much kept my family at bay while I sorted everything out. It didn't take me long to put on the mask, but mentally it did take me about another year to let it go. And that's another problem, is the whole mask idea. I don't know how to fully feel like this person that I am, but I am trying every day. I've seen many other parallels, even on things other than Salvia. With Salvia, I've left the parallels altogether and experienced core self. This was significant, as my longest lived and most detailed parallel experience to date. You know, this is really why you don't blast a whole bowl of high-level Salvia extract by yourself to see something cool. That's not what this is. It is extremely powerful, and it will loosen anyone's grip on reality. Best to go in there as a no one. This must be respected as something more than a drug. You have to let go of this illusion if you wish to do Salvia properly. Any and all attachments to yourself must be left at the door before you cross over. This is how you bypass the parallels and reach the core self. This is how we can remember who we truly are. A Thousand Lifetimes. A Salvia trip report posted by A Main to the Salvia subreddit 3 years ago. I come home from working a 12-hour day, a killer Sunday brunch shift where I managed, in good spirits as usual. My new roommate, who reintroduced me to LSD, says that she got some salvia in the mail, and maybe we should all try it. I was going to be off the next day, so I tried to be the big boy and vouched to go first. I sit down on the couch facing the TV, which is just a big black rectangle in my field of vision and a white wall surrounding it. We debate between ourselves whether to use a pipe or bong. I said that I would use the bong instead. The bag said 10x, but I have to imagine that someone either messed up the bagging, or I just did way too much. I loaded up what I would say was a full bowl, although I had no idea about any of this stuff. She didn't even tell me that the 3-gram bag she'd got had cost over $100. To me, it looked like shit, and I was already underestimating what would actually happen. I take this huge rip with a small torch, and the whole bowl disappears almost instantly. I have a glass screen, so I know I didn't lose any of it. I held it all in for probably 25 seconds, and then I fell straight to my left, right off of the couch and onto the floor. Bear in mind, I'm 6'6" and 260 pounds. All that follows is happening while I'm apparently rolling around on the living room floor for less than 3 minutes. The experience for me starts with the last thing I saw, the television. I call it the frame, black and void. I slip down into the couch and feel my face become 10,000 replicas like a flipbook, but you're just letting the pages fly away as you fall. Then, I have no face at all. I have no body, no eyes or hands to touch anything with. I am now fully aware that I am consciousness. I know this because I heard or maybe even saw the word in front of me. In this state, I am about the size of a bean, perfectly oval shaped, and I feel smooth but not hard, almost like a gel cap with liquid inside. I am now on the machine. I'm being held by something that looks like a long, slender metal rod with a scoop that cradles my bean of consciousness. I feel myself no longer falling or sliding, but now I can tell that I am moving forward like a big Ferris wheel, but not a fun one. I can't stop it or slow it down, and it starts moving faster and faster. I'm now seeing the black frame of the TV once again, a black rectangle. And now here is where crazy shit really starts to go down. Imagine your head is placed back against a wall. In a millisecond, you are propelled from one side to the other, and when you hit the other side, your face is smashing through glass, the black void rectangle. It wasn't painful per se, but you could feel it. And each time I hit this glass, I entered a different life. When I tell you that I lived 1,000 lives, I'm not joking. I now feel like I'm older than time itself. The ones I can remember very clearly was going from childhood to being a full 45-year-old man and dying of cancer in a hospital. I must say that in my actual reality, I am nowhere near 45 at all. I legitimately remember watching my kids grow up having a wife, crying and laughing, and loving people and feeling every single bit of it. My name in this reality was David. My actual name is not David. I was also a prehistoric man. I hunted small animals, I ate vegetables. I had people around, but we didn't talk. I remember trees and grass and rocks, as well as a mountain. In another, I was a large black woman in one life. I don't remember much, but she was pretty and had a very loud voice. I remember my bedroom, and it had yellow wallpaper with diamonds printed on it. I had an old white car with cream-coloured seats. Thousands of these happened, and between each of them, I smashed through the glass black void every time, feeling my face hit hard glass and hearing the break and shatter noises like a movie sound effect. Each one of these felt like a lifetime, but at the same time, they were instantaneously beginning and then over faster than you could blink. At some point, I heard a voice. I heard laughter. I remembered that I didn't want to live these lives. I just wanted to be back with my girlfriend and wanted to remember what my own life was. I somehow turned my consciousness beam to the left, and I felt a bad presence. It was making me see all of these lives. It was making me endure this machine. I just wanted off. I'm now looking to the left, and I can see the frames which encompass the alternate lives. They were flipping past me, and I realised that I didn't actually have to live through them. I could just watch them pass by. I wanted to find my own frame. Then suddenly, I have hands again, or at least fingers, and I can touch the frames and look at the image. It felt hard to do this, I must say. It felt desperate. I had no coordination. I was just touching as many as I could. I then hear another voice. I hear more laughter, although this time good laughter. Then I find my own frame. I grab it and put my face into it. Like, how else would you get into it? No glass smashing this time though. It feels like goo, like gel. It's clear and smooth, but I feel like I cannot breathe. I feel my arms and my face returning to me. I can swim through the goo. I pull myself through what feels like 100 yards. I feel like I'm 100 feet long. I can see a light within this void. I can see a face. I can actually see my living room. I grab the edges of the image and pull myself towards it, and it feels like I squeeze my face through a big butthole, and then pow, I hear this snap. I hear my friends say my name, my actual name. They sit me down on the couch, and I'm now back home. I take a few minutes to figure out if it's real or not, and then I started crying. It just felt like it wasn't real at all. I felt like I'd been gone far too long, and felt like I betrayed my girlfriend for living other lives for so very, very long. This all occurred around 2 years ago now. When it happened, I became depressed for about 4 months. I didn't feel like I belonged in this world anymore. I wasn't sure any of it was even real. I felt like work was trivial, after I'd already lived and died 1,000 times. And they were all so quick. Why did I even have to do this life thing anymore? I never really told anybody until now how I felt on the inside. I couldn't tell my girlfriend that I felt like life was pointless or possibly even fabricated. That I believed I actually went into some other dimension and bent time itself. After 2 years, I wish I could go back to the same place without fear and confront it all once more. But I do not think that I could ever try it again. There's a feeling I get in the back of my neck that tells me not to, or I'll be smashed through glass for another eternity. by something that feels the need to punish me for taking every day's moment for granted. Please start small if you're going to do this. Don't be a fucking hero. I realised I had some depression to deal with, and this, in a way, helped me to come to terms with it in a sense. I realised how much I love the frame I am in now. I don't want to be a guy named David or a fucking caveman. I haven't had a good psych trip since that. I get the back of the neck feeling when I try other stuff or even get too high on herb. Maybe it's a good thing. I've chilled out a lot since then. The problem is though, is I almost believe that when I die, I'll have to go back on the wheel forever. Maybe we all will. Maybe that's the cycle. All I'll say is enjoy your precious moments, folks. This life is important and unique. I have a video of me rolling around on the ground. If enough people want to see it and made it to the bottom of this post, maybe I'll put it up. But it is pretty fucking stupid. And I wish I could edit it to not show my face. TLDR. Fucking Salvia, man. This is all 100% true, and it will stay with me forever. I died and discovered the true meaning of life. A 60x Salvia trip report posted by SBSB Kinney 2 to the Salvia subreddit 4 years ago. I broke through on Salvia for the first time in 2.5 years. I'll do my best to explain what happened because it was earth-shattering in a good way. I want to hear if anyone here has had similar experiences to mine. I'm also going to break up the bodies of text a lot to make it easier to read. The TLDR version is that I was in a trippy dimensional knot before peeling myself out of existence. But I didn't die. I found out that I am merely a bump on the massive blob of consciousness that is humanity, and I can go live another lifetime anytime I want. I vibed in the circle for a bit, forgot who I was, then slowly came back to it. Anyways, I've smoked Salvia at least 12 times, but only broken through once before. That time was definitely worth it for the bucket list, but it did freak me out a bit and left me with more questions about the meaning of life than before. Ever since that time, I would only take small hits for mild effects, but for the most part, I wouldn't touch the stuff for months on end. Recently, I've been entertaining the idea of mirrors and their place in the supernatural world due to the malevolent feeling I get when I stare at myself in it for too long. It's like I'm not looking at my reflection, but the reflection is looking at me. The other day, I took some Salvia and stared at myself in the mirror for 30 minutes straight. I definitely noticed the effects of the Salvia, but was aware of my surroundings the entire time. I must have been craving more on a subconscious level though, because the next night I loaded an even bigger bowl. I sat down on a red leather couch in my room with the lights set to royal blue. I also set my TV to a YouTube video of trippy fractal animations so that the mild effects would be amplified. I took a decent hit of the small 60x Salvia bowl that I'd packed and started to hold the smoke in. I remember leaning down to the right. I hadn't even had time to set the bong down before things started changing. Despite being in a blue room, the colours shifted to a much more golden, yellow, wheat field sort of tone. But that's the easiest of changes I can actually describe. The next part is confusing, because it happened in what I could only imagine to be a 4th dimensional plane. But I'll describe it in an analogy. Imagine you're tie-dyeing a shirt. The first step is to pinch and twist in the middle, until it's a bundle ready to die. Now, imagine that, but upscaled so that you become some unknown entity, and a twisted tie-dye shirt becomes the universe as I was now experiencing it. If you've heard of a similar analogy for a wormhole with a piece of paper, this may help explain what I was experiencing. The centre of this dimensional knot started off small, and at my core, right hip. Initially inconsequential, but once I noticed its significance, its magnitude grew. I could tell something was wrong, but couldn't tell what was wrong about it. It felt as if my head was bent over and going through my thigh, as if time and space had literally folded in half. By this point, I had of course forgotten that I'd even taken Salvia. I felt trapped and scared, and wanted to return to normalcy, whatever that was. Frantically looking for a solution, I realised I could grab the centre, or tab for lack of better words, that controlled this dimensional phenomenon. I quickly reached down towards my right hip. I grabbed the tab and pull it in a leftward motion over my shoulder. And to my horror, I realised that this only made things worse by actually increasing the rate at which my universe was collapsing with me at the gravitational centre. I remember some force of my own mind saying, "Isn't it funny how all of your old problems pale in comparison to being stuck in this dimensional knot?" I agreed with my mind and pondered on how insignificant all of my problems in the past had been. I couldn't even remember them now. Anytime I resisted, reality only twisted more. My actions were irreversible. I could sense that the twisting was reaching its culmination and feared what was next to come. Some quick context. At this point in the trip, I was still holding the bong, and I know in retrospect that I dropped it on my duvet cover, soaking my blanket in dirty bong water. I probably saw this and thought, "Shit," to myself in real life. But this translated differently in terms of what I was perceiving on Salvia. So, back to the trip. As the twisting progressed, my mind began to detach from all physical things, including my own body. I felt as if I were a wet towel, soaked in memories, thoughts, and all of my worldly possessions, being wrung out by an unstoppable force. The last physical possession I saw leave me was the bong. And as I dropped it, I started hearing obscene language and slurs from a chorus of voices, as if they were the final remnants of my words being squeezed out of me. The curse words continued in a shrill tone as the visuals I was experiencing increased to a level of complexity that I genuinely couldn't possibly describe to you. With each dimensional fold, my confusion increased, and I gradually moved towards the realization that I was probably dying. After all, my universe was literally collapsing. However, I also began to sense a benevolent presence that was contributing to the chorus of curses. It felt as though someone were talking to me, cradling me throughout the whole process, as if it were divine. It felt as if each revelation of my death was made because of the things I was being shown. I then hear my inner voice speak in unison with my higher consciousness guide. I'll do my best to paraphrase. Imagine this, but with the trippy fractal animations. Shit, fuck, shit. Oh shit, fuck. I start calming down. Okay. Am I dying? The benevolent presence affirms my suspicion. Well, I guess there's nothing I can do to stop it. At least I'll finally know what happens. This feels familiar though. In a way, it feels right. It's like I'm recalling forgotten information about the mysteries of the universe. At this point, I gasped in revelation. Oh my god. this is how I wanted myself to find out. I chose this so very long ago. I started to realise that the divine presence who was guiding and comforting me this whole time was myself, but not in the traditional sense. I was far more evolved and ever powerful. More importantly, I was a loving presence that happily awaited mortal me's return from the third dimension. I then said in awe, "Perfectly crafted to reveal everything to me. Does this mean I'll finally find out what happens next?" Oh my God, I remember. I felt overjoyed as I began to realise that I was returning home. After this revelation, the dimensional collapse progressed exponentially until I finally left this realm and returned to what I now recognise to be my true origin, the soul consciousness from which we all originate. I'll try my best to describe how this origin functions as I understood it. First, some context. 5 years ago, I asked a girl named Bella if she believed in God. She told me that she believed we all derive from the same universal being. She believed that when you die, your soul rejoins the mass to merge with everybody else's. I found it crazy at the time, but in hindsight, I realised that I saw the exact thing that she described. In this new yet entirely familiar plane, I saw my entire life and identity as a raised bump inside a massive cylinder or ring, with what looked like pale blue lava flowing harmoniously amongst itself. However, it was not actually lava, but the physical form of all the energy, light, and consciousness in the universe existing as one. There are other bumps on the cylinder as well, each representing a different identity or soul, currently experiencing a lifetime. Once their lifetime ends, the bump subsides and the identity rejoins the soul consciousness once more. I existed briefly as a bump on the cylinder, long enough to finally understand. Then, I felt a sense of euphoria rush over me as I, the bump, lost all form and merged back into the ring, just as all bumps have been doing for infinity. I was actually happy to be dead. Being a part of and circulating with this energy and presence felt amazing and all-loving. As I thought about how human experiences are only accessible through the ring, I realised I could live a life again if I wanted, but it was all up to me. To clarify just how up to me it was, the small amount of identity that I had left could decide to disperse and fully integrate back into the ring, or stay as a unit moving among other identities who chose the same path. Additionally, I could choose to go back to Earth reincarnated if I so desired, to inhabit a new vessel to experience life. I could even live the exact same life all over again. This entity I'd become truly defied all laws of time and space as humans understand it. I remember feeling a strong sense of relief and even laughter when I thought about all the moments wasted worrying about my mortality, when I should have known that nothing ever ceases to exist. It simply changes forms. Just as energy cannot be created or destroyed, neither can consciousness. I felt at one with the universe. I don't remember coming out of the trip too well, but I remember being back in my room and seeing the trippy fractal animations I'd put on my TV beforehand. They looked way more trippy than usual, and the patterns extended past the screen. I wrote a summary of what happened on a piece of paper, while still partially tripping. The handwriting was frantic, large and messy. It reads as follows. Things were peeling in a dimensional way. I heard slurs culminating to my life force, ending in realising that was how I was going to tell myself. this all culminated till I died. It was quite comforting. I had forgotten that I was Seeley. I can't remember what I wanted. I remember when I was writing this being frustrated about that last sentence. That wasn't me explaining how I felt during the trip, but rather the frustration I felt over forgetting something crucial. My best bet is that it was some concept that actually explains the science behind everything I'm claiming. I'll always wonder though. I talked to a friend about everything this morning, and he suggested that considering I don't remember the end of my trip, my soul could have chosen to live as Seeley for just a bit longer, suggesting this could have been real. I'm not saying that this is the truth behind the afterlife, but considering I was an atheist before, this certainly is a more comforting story to tell myself. Plus, unlike those who follow more established religions, I actually saw this with my own eyes, and all it took was smoking a plant produced naturally by our planet.